There are moments in life that nobody plans for. Moments that arrive without warning, like weather that changes before you can even think to reach for an umbrella. And then there are the people who, in those moments, reach for something far more precious. Something that costs them everything and gains them nothing, except, maybe, their soul. This is one of those stories. And it begins, the way so many real stories do, not with a headline or a hero, but with a boy who was simply trying to disappear. His name was Caleb. He was 16 years old, with lean, restless energy in every step he took, the kind of kid who moved like he was always a little bit late for somewhere even when he had nowhere to be. He wore a faded rust-colored hoodie, the kind that had been through too many washes and held onto the shape of someone else's better days. His jeans were worn at the knees, his sneakers scuffed at the toes. His dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that said nobody had told him to cut it in a while, and that was the truth. Caleb had been on the road for 11 days. He wasn't running toward anything. He was just running from the kind of quiet that settles into a house when the love has left it, the kind that follows you into your bedroom at night and sits on your chest until morning. His father had been gone for 2 years. His mother had found her own way of disappearing without leaving. So Caleb left first. He had $43 in his pocket, a backpack with 2 changes of clothes, and the particular kind of loneliness that only teenagers know, enormous and invisible all at once. He had drifted through 3 towns before landing in Clover Ridge, a small highway community in the kind of American middle that most people drive through without stopping. But Caleb had stopped. He had stopped because his feet hurt, and because through the window of a diner called Patsy's, he could see a counter with round vinyl stools and a pie display, and something in that image pulled at him the way home is supposed to pull at you, even when home hasn't ever quite worked. He went inside. Patsy's diner smelled of coffee and griddle grease and something faintly sweet apple pie, as it turned out, warm in the case by the register. The afternoon light came through the large front windows in long, golden slants, settling on the checkered floor like something out of a memory you can't quite place but know you've had. Caleb took a stool at the counter. He ordered a cup of coffee and a slice of that pie, and he sat with both hands wrapped around the mug the way you do when something warm is the closest thing you have to a hug. That was when he noticed them. A woman sat in a booth near the front window, the kind of woman who had a steadiness about her, a calm that you could feel from across the room. Her name was Sandra. She was in her mid-30s, with brown hair pulled back and the quiet, watchful eyes of a person who has learned to pay attention to the world. She wore a simple flannel shirt, and she had the kind of hands that looked used to work and used to holding things gently at the same time. In the booth beside her, pressed close to her side, was a little girl. Her name was Emma. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with her dark hair and 2 uneven pigtails that suggested she had done them herself that morning. Emma was coloring in a paper placemat with a set of crayons the diner kept for young visitors, her tongue pressed lightly to her lower lip as she concentrated. Every so often, she would hold up what she was drawing to show her mother, and Sandra would lean in and say something that made the little girl beam. Caleb watched them for a moment. Not in any way that was strange or intrusive. He watched them the way you watch a fire, because there is warmth there, and warmth has a way of drawing the eyes of those who are cold. He looked back at his pie. He didn't know, in that moment, that Sandra's husband, a broad, gentle man named Dale, who wore a leather vest with a patch on the back and rode a motorcycle with the kind of reverence some men give to church, was parked outside, talking to a friend in the lot. He didn't know that Dale led a riding club in this county, a group of men and women who had found family in each other the way people do when life scatters the families they were born into. He didn't know any of that. He was just a boy with a slice of apple pie and $43 and nowhere to be. It happened fast. The way these things always do. The dark truck came down the highway and slowed, not stopping, just slowing, the way something wrong moves before it strikes. There was a sound. Sharp and terrible, like the world cracking at a seam. The front window of Patsy's diner exploded inward in a shower of glass that caught the afternoon light and scattered it in 1,000 terrible directions. Sandra screamed. She grabbed Emma. She pulled her daughter down below the edge of the booth, folding herself over the little girl's body the way a mother does, instinctively, completely, without a single thought for herself. And Caleb moved. Later, he would not be able to explain it. He would not have words for the thing that happened inside him in that split second. He would only say that he saw them, Sandra's face turned toward her daughter, Emma's small hands gripping her mother's sleeve, and something older than thought took over. Something that all the loneliness and wandering of the past 11 days had not managed to touch. He was off that stool and across the diner floor before the second shot came. He threw himself between the window and the booth, putting his body between the glass and the woman and the child he had never met. His arms went wide, a gesture both absurd and ancient, the gesture of someone standing between harm and the people harm intends to reach. There was another crack. Another burst of shattering. Caleb felt something sting across his upper arm and the side of his face. He did not stop moving. He pushed Sandra and Emma lower, covering the space above them, making himself as large as a 16-year-old boy in a worn-out hoodie could possibly be. And then it was over. The truck accelerated and was gone. The diner was silent in the way that follows violence, a silence so complete it almost rings. Someone was crying somewhere. Someone else was on the phone. The cook had come out from the kitchen and was standing in the doorway with a spatula still in his hand, frozen mid-turn. Caleb sat back on his heels. His arm was bleeding, not badly, a cut from the glass, but bleeding. His cheek stung. He looked down at Sandra, who was already looking up at him, her arms still wrapped around Emma. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Emma, from inside her mother's arms, said in a very small and serious voice, "Are you okay?" And Caleb, who had not been asked that question in a very long time, felt something move through him that he had no name for then and barely has a name for now. "Yeah," he said. "I'm okay." Dale heard the shots from the parking lot. He was inside in seconds, all 6 feet of him, broad shoulders, worried eyes, and when he found his wife and daughter unhurt, he held them both so hard and so long that Emma eventually had to say, "Daddy, I can't breathe," which made Sandra laugh even as she was still crying. Then Dale looked at the boy. The boy was sitting on the diner floor, pressing his sleeve against the cut on his arm. He looked younger than 16 just then. He looked like what he was, a child who was alone in the world and had chosen, for reasons he couldn't yet explain, to throw himself between someone else and everything dangerous. Dale crouched down to Caleb's level. "What's your name, son?" "Caleb." "Caleb." Dale said the name carefully, like he was committing it to memory. "I'm Dale. That's my wife Sandra and my daughter Emma." He paused. "You just put yourself between them and that window." Caleb looked at the floor. "Somebody had to." Dale was quiet for a moment. He had been a lot of places and met a lot of people over the course of his life, and he knew when he was in the presence of something real. He put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Let's get that arm looked at," he said. "And then you're going to tell me where your people are." Caleb was quiet. And in that quiet, Dale understood something important. "All right," Dale said, more gently. "We'll figure it out." The hospital in Clover Ridge was a small regional facility, the kind with a parking lot that had seen better days and a waiting room with chairs that had been reupholstered once and should have been again by now. The emergency room staff was kind and efficient. Caleb's arm needed 12 stitches and a bandage. His cheek needed cleaning and a smaller dressing. He was given a cup of bad coffee and a packet of crackers, and he sat in a plastic chair with Sandra beside him while Dale made phone calls in the hallway. What Caleb did not know, what he could not have known, was what those phone calls were setting in motion. Dale was a man with a community. Not just a writing club, but a network of people across 3 counties who had looked out for each other through hard times and good ones, who had ridden together to funerals and to fundraisers and to the hospital bedsides of people who needed to know they were not alone. He made 3 calls. Those 3 people each made 3 more. And then, as the afternoon deepened toward evening, they began to arrive. Motorcycles. One by one at first, then in clusters, then in a steady, rolling procession that filled the hospital parking lot and spilled into the side street and eventually stretched half a block down the road. Men and women in leather vests, in denim jackets with patches, in riding boots and flannel shirts. Young and old. Gray-haired grandmothers who had been writing since before Caleb was born. Young fathers who had learned about what happened and couldn't stay home. By 7 o'clock that evening, there were over 1,000 of them. They did not make noise. They did not demand anything. They stood or sat or leaned against their bikes, and they waited. They had brought food, sandwiches wrapped in foil, thermoses of coffee, a box of donuts that got passed around and was gone in minutes. Someone had brought a folding chair for an older woman who needed to sit. Someone else had a small portable speaker playing old country music so softly you had to be close to hear it. A young nurse named Patricia stepped outside to look and stood there for a long moment with her hand over her mouth. She went back inside and found Caleb. "Hey," she said gently. "Come look at something." Caleb stood at the lobby window. He looked out at the parking lot full of people, 1,000 strangers who had come because one of their own had called, because a boy they had never met had done something that mattered. The evening light was going gold and low, and it caught the chrome of all those motorcycles and turned the parking lot into something that shimmered. He didn't say anything for a long time. Sandra came and stood beside him. She didn't put her arm around him or say anything meaningful. She just stood there with him, the way people who understand grief and grace stand beside someone who needs a witness. "They came for you," she said finally. Quietly. "They don't even know me. They know what you did." She paused. "And that's enough for people like us." Caleb was 16 years old, and he had spent 11 days believing the world had no room for him. He stood at that window for a long time, watching the light change over 1,000 people who had come out into the evening for the sake of a boy they'd never met, and something in him, something that had been locked up very tight for a very long time, began, slowly, to open. Dale arranged for Caleb to stay with a family in Clover Ridge that night. A couple named Roy and Paulette, who had an extra room and a golden retriever named Biscuit, who immediately adopted Caleb as a personal project, following him from room to room and sleeping across the foot of his bed. In the weeks that followed, things moved in the quiet, unhurried way that real things move. Dale and Sandra helped Caleb reach out to a social worker named Grace, a kind woman with reading glasses she was always losing, who helped him understand his options and who listened to him without once making him feel like a problem to be solved. His mother, it turned out, had been looking for him, not in the way he had feared, not with anger, but with a grief that had finally, after months of going the wrong direction, turned her toward getting help. It was not a perfect reunion. Real life rarely offers those. But it was a beginning, and beginnings, as anyone in their middle years will tell you, are more valuable than perfection. Caleb spent 2 months in Clover Ridge before going home. He had Sunday dinners with Dale and Sandra and Emma, who decided he was her honorary older brother and treated this as a settled, administrative matter that required no further discussion. He helped Dale in the garage on Saturday mornings, learning the names of tools and the patience that comes with working with your hands. He sat on Roy and Paulette's porch in the evenings watching the light leave the sky, with Biscuit's heavy head in his lap. He was still a teenager with a complicated road ahead of him. That did not change. But something else changed. Something quiet and important, the kind of thing that doesn't announce itself but simply becomes part of how you move through the world. He had learned that kindness does not wait to know you before it shows up. It showed up for him in a diner in a worn-out hoodie that afternoon. And it showed up in a parking lot full of motorcycles in the golden evening, 1,000 people standing witness to the simple, enormous fact that he mattered. Years later, many years later, when Caleb was in his 30s and had a life that still surprised him with its goodness, he would tell this story to people who needed to hear it. He would tell it slowly, the way it deserves to be told. He would say that the thing about courage is that it rarely comes from certainty. It comes from the moment, and from something in you that decides, without consulting your fear, without checking the odds, that someone else's safety is worth more than your own comfort. He would say that the 1,000 bikers in that parking lot taught him something he carried ever after. That community is not just the people you grew up with or the people who share your name. Community is the people who show up. Who hear that something happened and get on their bikes and ride out into the evening and stand in the parking lot and wait, not because they have to, not because there's anything in it for them, but because that is what it means to belong to something larger than yourself. He would say that a little girl named Emma once asked him, from the shelter of her mother's arms, with glass still on the floor around them, "Are you okay?" And that sometimes, the most important question in the world is the simplest one. Asked by the smallest voice. In the middle of the scariest moment. Are you okay? He is. He really is. And he never forgot the afternoon in Patsy's diner when a woman and her daughter and 1,000 strangers showed him that he was worth showing up for. None of us forget those moments. They become the quiet foundation of everything.